Two abandoned wolf cubs were freezing until a Belgian Malinois became their mother. The dog found it before the man even knew what to look for. Her name was Vera, a Belgian Malinois, 4 years old, tawny-coated with a black mask that made her amber eyes look almost luminous against the pale winter sky. 48 pounds of trained muscle and instinct. She had been working with Ranger Daniel Couto for 3 years, and in 3 years she had never once deviated from a patrol sweep without reason. Until today. They had set out at 6:30 from the station truck, moving northeast along the ridgeline trail in the San Juan Range. The storm 2 nights before had dropped 18 inches, the kind of snow that swallowed things, fence posts, trail markers, anything left out too long. Daniel's job was to assess erosion damage to the protected corridor, check for downed trees blocking the seasonal creek, radio in the usual report. Routine. He'd done it 100 times. Vera had been working the left flank, nose low, ears soft. Then, somewhere around the 2nd mile marker, she stopped. "Vera, come." She didn't come. She turned hard left, off the trail, into a dense tangle of wild alder and snowberry. Her tail dropped, not tucked, not fearful, the particular angle that Daniel had learned to read as something between focus and urgency. She pushed through a narrow gap in the brush and disappeared. He followed, irritated, already thinking about the report he needed to file by noon. The clearing beyond the alders was no bigger than a bedroom. A natural bowl formed by the terrain, sheltered from the wind, filled with undisturbed snow that rose in smooth drifts against the root base of 3 old pines. Beautiful, in a still sort of way. Nothing out of place that Daniel could see. But Vera was already at the base of the largest drift. She inhaled, slow, deliberate, held it, then exhaled, and inhaled again. Her whole posture changed. Ribs expanded, ears pinned forward. She sat down, one sharp bark, clean, controlled, alert signal. "What is it, girl?" Daniel stepped closer, scanning the snow. It looked unbroken, clean. But Vera didn't sit for nothing. She had never once sat for nothing. She began to dig. Not frantically, not the way a dog digs when chasing a scent for sport. Methodical. Both front paws working in precise alternation, throwing snow back between her haunches. She worked a foot deep, then 18 inches, and then her movements slowed. Daniel crouched. He reached into the cavity she'd opened and pressed his gloved palm flat against the snow. Something beneath it moved. What do you think Vera sensed before Daniel could even see the snow shift? Drop your thoughts below. By the time he pulled the second one free, his hands were shaking. Not from the cold. The first pup had come out of the snow like something unfinished. A small gray body, barely the size of his forearm, matted fur crusted with ice along the spine. Its eyes were closed. Its mouth moved in a slow, rhythmic tremble, as if trying to form a sound that hadn't arrived yet. Daniel held it against his chest without thinking, pressing it through his jacket to the fleece underneath. The warmth of his own body, the only thing he had. Then Vera pushed her muzzle deeper into the cavity and held still. There was a second one. He reached in with his free hand and felt it. Smaller than the first, tucked against what must have been a root wall, curled so tightly it felt like a stone. He lifted it carefully, cradling both now, one in each arm, backing away from the hole and dropping to one knee in the snow. 2 wolf pups. Gray, with faint buff markings along the ears and forelegs. Maybe 10 days old, maybe less. Their eyes hadn't opened yet. Their legs moved in weak, uncoordinated pulses. Not struggle, not fight. Just the last mechanical effort of bodies still trying. Daniel looked up. The clearing around them was silent. No tracks leading in. No blood on the snow. He stood slowly and circled the bowl, reading the surface the way he'd been trained. Pressure points, scatter patterns, disturbance lines. 20 yards out, past the alders, he found what he was looking for. A confusion of tracks, overlapping and broken, heading northeast in a ragged line. Large paws, multiple animals, moving fast and not returning. The storm would have done the rest and filled in whatever story was left, buried the details under 18 clean inches of white. The alcove was gone. The pack had scattered or fled or been driven off. There was no way to know which. He came back to the clearing. Vera hadn't moved. She was sitting exactly where he'd left her, positioned between the pine roots and the open space, her body angled slightly forward, not guarding the hole, guarding the pups in his arms. Her nostrils worked in short, rapid pulls. She tracked every small movement the pups made, the trembling, the faint leg kicks, and her ears adjusted each time, tilting toward the sound. She hadn't made another noise. Daniel unzipped his jacket the rest of the way and tucked both pups against his chest, re-zipping over them until only their heads were visible. He could feel their heartbeats, light and very fast, like something mechanical winding down. He keyed his radio with one hand. "Station, this is Kudo. I'm at grid November 7, northeast of marker 2. I need a pickup and I need someone to call Ridgecrest Rehab right now." He paused. "I have 2 wolf pups, neonatal, hypothermic, static." Then, "Copy that, Daniel. Can you confirm, did you say wolves?" He looked down at the 2 small faces pressed against his sternum. Their mouths had stopped trembling. They were absorbing the heat now, going still in a different way. Not the stillness of dying, but the first, fragile stillness of something deciding to stay. "Yeah," he said. "Confirm wolves." Vera fell in beside him as he started back toward the trail, close enough that her shoulder brushed his leg with every step. She didn't range ahead. She didn't scout. She stayed exactly there, matching his pace, her eyes moving between the path and the bundle against his chest. The clouds above the ridge had gone a flat pewter gray. More snow by afternoon, the forecast had said. Another 6 inches, maybe 8. He walked faster. The rehabilitation center smelled like antiseptic and cedar shavings, and the fluorescent lights made everything look slightly too real. Daniel had been there before, brought in injured raptors, a mule deer with a broken leg, once a black bear cub so dehydrated it couldn't lift its head. He knew the intake room. He knew the protocol. Hand off the animal, sign the form, go back to work. He set both pups on the examination table and stepped back. Dr. Mara Ellison worked without speaking, moving a warming pad beneath them, checking gum color, assessing core temp with a rectal probe barely thicker than a matchstick, 42 degrees. Critically low but not unsurvivable. She called for a glucose solution and a feeding syringe and began the slow work of warming them from the outside in. Vera sat near the door. She had been allowed inside only because Daniel had asked twice and Mara had looked at him, then at the dog, and made a pragmatic decision. The Malinois wasn't pacing. She wasn't whining. She sat with her front legs perfectly straight and watched the table with an attention so fixed it was almost uncomfortable, the kind of focus that made the room feel smaller. "She going to be a problem?" Mara asked, not looking up. "No," Daniel said, and he believed it. 20 minutes in, the smaller pup made a sound. It wasn't a cry exactly, more like a vibration, something felt before it was heard, a thin frequency that rose and broke and rose again, the kind of sound that triggers something involuntary in certain mammals. An ancient wire buried deep. Vera stood up. She crossed the room in 4 steps, slow and deliberate, and stopped at the edge of the table. Mara glanced over her shoulder, hand moving instinctively toward the pup, but the dog didn't lunge, didn't snap. She extended her muzzle toward the smaller pup with the careful geometry of an animal that understands fragility, and made contact, the tip of her nose touching the pup's face just below the ear. She inhaled. Then she began to lick. Long, gentle strokes across the pup's muzzle and forehead, the motion rhythmic and sure. The pup's legs moved, stronger now, more coordinated, pushing against nothing, searching. Mara set down the syringe. "She lost a litter," Daniel said quietly. It wasn't a question. He'd known for 3 weeks. A stillbirth, all 4, 2 days after whelping. Vera had been quieter since. Not broken. The dog didn't break, but quieter in a way he noticed and didn't mention. Mara watched for a moment. "She's still producing?" "Probably, I don't know for certain." The vet pulled on a fresh glove and carefully checked. She straightened up and looked at Daniel with an expression that wasn't quite surprise, more like the face of someone recalculating. "She is," Mara said. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Vera had moved to the larger pup now, working the same slow rhythm. The pup turned its head toward her, blind and instinctive, mouth opening. She allowed it, didn't flinch, adjusted her position slightly, lowering her chest closer to the table's edge. "That's not something I can just let happen," Mara said carefully. "I know. A cross-species nursing under these conditions. The pups need wolf milk composition, the immunological profile, the fat ratios." "I know," Daniel said again, but they were both still watching, because the larger pup had found her fur with its mouth and was pressing against her with everything its 10-day-old body had, and Vera had gone completely still, not tense, not uncertain, still in the way that animals go still when something inside them has made a decision that the rest of the body is simply catching up to. Mara pulled out her phone and stepped into the hallway to make a call. Daniel stayed. He watched Vera lower her head and rest her chin gently against the warming pad, her amber eyes half closed, both pups pressed against her side. Her breathing slowed. The pup's breathing slowed with it, sinking in the unconscious way of small animals near warmth. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly overhead. Outside, the first flakes of the afternoon snow were beginning to fall. The meeting happened at 8 a.m. the following morning, in a room that smelled like bad coffee and felt like a place where things got decided without enough information. Mara had called the regional wildlife coordinator overnight. He had called the state office. By morning, there were 4 people sitting around a folding table at Ridgecrest. Daniel, Mara, a man named Frank Greer from the Division of Wildlife Management who kept clicking his pen, and a wolf recovery specialist named Dr. Sonia Bott, who had driven 3 hours and looked like she'd done it before sunrise. On the table between them, 2 folders, a printed protocol sheet, and a photograph someone had taken the night before, Vera lying on her side on the warming pad, both pups tucked against her abdomen, all 3 of them asleep. Frank Greer looked at the photograph and clicked his pen. "I want to be clear," he said, "that we are not in the business of creating dependency situations between domestic animals and wildlife subjects designated for reintroduction." "No one's arguing that," Mara said. "The photograph suggests otherwise. The photograph is from last night when they were hypothermic and the alternative was a glucose drip and a heating lamp." She kept her voice level. "Both pups nursed. Both pups are stable this morning. That's the outcome we needed." Sonia Bott leaned forward and turned the photograph toward her. She studied it for a moment, then set it down. "What's the dog's background?" 3 years field work, Daniel said. "Single handler. No aggression history. She lost her own litter 18 days ago." Sonia nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're connecting things they already suspected. "Here's the problem," Frank said. He spread his hands flat on the table, a gesture that seemed rehearsed. "These animals are part of a monitored recovery population. If they survive, which is not guaranteed, they need to be reintroduced into wild conditions within a functional timeline. Imprinting on a domestic dog, on human handlers, on this facility, every day that happens is a day we're working against. They're 10 days old," Daniel said. "They can't regulate their own temperature, which is exactly why the standard protocol is artificial rearing, controlled exposure, minimize human and domestic animal contact from the start." The room was quiet for a moment. Mara opened one of the folders. "Survival rate for neonatal wolves under artificial rearing at this developmental stage with no maternal antibody transfer, in facilities comparable to ours. I pulled the numbers this morning." She turned the page so Frank could see it. 31%. Another silence. Longer this time. Sonia picked up the pen she'd placed beside her notepad and didn't write anything. "If we allow supervised nursing, controlled sessions, duration limited with the handler present, what's your projection?" "Honest answer? I don't know," Mara said. "The immunological support alone changes the calculus significantly. The behavioral question is harder. But I've watched that dog for the past 14 hours and I can tell you she is not imprinting them. She's not treating them like puppies. She keeps a physical distance when they're not nursing. She doesn't solicit interaction. She's providing a function." "Animals don't make that distinction," Frank said. "She does," Daniel said quietly. Frank looked at him. "I've worked with her for 3 years. She knows the difference between her job and everything else." He paused. "She's doing her job." The meeting ran another 40 minutes. Frank cited 3 separate regulatory frameworks. Sonia asked careful questions and wrote down the answers. Mara presented her overnight observations in clinical language that left no room for sentiment. In the end, they agreed on a trial. Supervised nursing sessions, twice daily, 30 minutes maximum. No unsupervised contact. Weekly behavioral assessments. Immediate discontinuation if either pup showed signs of domestic imprinting. Approaching humans voluntarily. Failing to exhibit appropriate fear responses. Seeking contact outside feeding context. Frank signed the authorization form with the efficient joylessness of a man who believed he was being overruled. Daniel drove back to the facility that afternoon and found Vera in the observation kennel they'd set up adjacent to the pup's enclosure. She was lying with her side against the wire partition, not pacing, not vocalizing, just present. On the other side of the wire, both pups were awake, moving with more purpose than the day before. Stronger legs, heads lifting, noses working the air. The smaller one had found the edge of the partition and pressed its face against the wire. Vera didn't move toward it. She stayed exactly where she was, her breathing slow, her eyes tracking, but calm. Daniel crouched beside the kennel and watched them for a long time. Outside, the snow had stopped. The afternoon light came through the facility's narrow windows at a low angle, catching the dust in the air, and for a moment the whole room looked amber, warm and provisional, like something that existed only in that particular light and would look completely different by morning. He didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say. 6 weeks later, the pups had names they would never know. The staff had given them anyway. The smaller one called Ash, the larger one Cinder, written on a whiteboard in the hallway with a running weight log beside each name. Mara had allowed it with the understanding that the names were for the humans, not the animals. A practical distinction that everyone accepted and no one fully believed. They were growing fast. At 7 weeks, Cinder weighed 4.2 kilograms and moved through the enclosure with a loose, exploratory confidence, testing surfaces, tracking airflow, spending long minutes investigating the seam where the wall met the floor, as though something important was hidden there. Ash was smaller but quicker, reactive in a way that was already different from any domestic dog Daniel had observed. A door closing in the adjacent room would drop both pups flat in a fraction of a second, ears back, bodies pressed to the ground. Not trained, not learned, just there, already wired in, a response so fast it preceded thought. The nursing sessions had continued on schedule. Vera arrived each morning and afternoon with Daniel, entered the supervised enclosure, and allowed the pups to feed. She was patient with them in a way that was functional rather than tender, tolerating their increasingly rough approach, correcting them with a low warning when they bit too hard, standing to end the session when she decided it was finished. She didn't linger. When Daniel clipped the lead and moved toward the door, she went with him without looking back. Sonia Bott came every Thursday. She ran her assessments with quiet efficiency, fear response tests, proximity evaluations, a standardized protocol for measuring human-animal bonding indicators. Each week she wrote her notes and said little until the following Thursday. Then, in the 4th week, she lingered after the others had left and stood at the observation window with her arms crossed. "The female is clean," she said. "No attachment behaviors outside feeding context. Approaches only when leashed and guided in. Disengages on handler cue." She paused. "She's better at this than most people would be." Daniel said nothing. "The pups are the question." Sonia tapped her pen against her notepad. "Cinder is tracking well. Fear responses within normal range. No voluntary human approach. Good environmental wariness. A beat. Ash is slower to develop the aversion profile. Not alarming yet, but we're watching it." "What does that mean practically?" "It means we begin the separation phase in 2 weeks instead of 3. Reduce sessions to once daily for 1 week, then discontinue." She turned from the window. "The goal was always a bridge, not a bond. We got the bridge. Now we take it down carefully." Daniel understood. He had understood from the beginning. That didn't make it simpler. The last full week, he noticed changes that the behavioral assessments didn't capture. Vera began sitting farther from the partition between sessions. Not gradually. One day she had been pressed against the wire. The next, she was centered in her kennel, equidistant from every wall. He didn't know what had shifted inside her, or whether anything had shifted at all. Animals didn't narrate their adjustments. They simply made them. The pups, for their part, were becoming something that the facility couldn't fully contain. Cinder had begun vocalizing in the early morning. Not barking, not whining, but a low, wavering sound that rose and broke in a way that was distinctly not domestic. The sound moved through the building differently than other animal sounds. It found corners. It lingered. Ash joined in 3 days later. The sound woke Daniel the one night he stayed over to help with a late intake. He lay in the break room cot and listened to it move through the walls and thought about the clearing in the snow, the undisturbed white surface, the moment before Vera had started digging, how close it had been, how many versions of the story ended before that clearing. On the last day of supervised sessions, Daniel brought Vera in as usual. She fed them. Cinder finished first and moved away, already losing interest. Attention pulled toward a sound outside the building. A truck engine, a bird, something carried on the wind. Ash fed longer, and when Vera stood to signal the end, the smaller pup held on an extra moment before releasing. Vera looked down at it. She didn't lick it, didn't lower her head. She stood and looked at it the way she looked at things she was committing to memory. Still, thorough, unhurried. Then she turned and walked to the door and waited for Daniel to open it. He clipped the lead. Opened the door. She moved through it at his left side, exactly where she always walked, her shoulder at his knee, her stride matching his without effort. Behind them, Ash made the sound again, the low, wavering call that didn't belong inside walls. Vera's ear rotated back. She didn't slow down. The transfer happened on a Tuesday, which felt wrong for reasons Daniel couldn't explain. Momentous things, he had always thought, should happen on days with more weather, more friction. Tuesday was clear and cold and unremarkable. The sky a flat, pale blue that offered nothing. The kind of day that just processed events without recording them. The adaptation enclosure was 11 acres of mixed conifer and meadow, in a protected corridor 40 miles northeast of Ridgecrest, bordered on two sides by federal wilderness. It had been used twice before for wolf reintroduction staging. The fencing was 12 feet high and sunk 4 feet into the ground. There was a creek running through the eastern third. A natural kill had been placed inside 2 days prior to establish scent and prey association. Sonia Bott ran the transfer. 2 field technicians handled the transport crates. Daniel was there as the handler of record, which meant he stood at a designated distance and observed and signed paperwork. Mara hadn't come. She had a procedure scheduled, she said. Daniel believed her and understood her simultaneously. The crates were opened remotely from 40 yards. Standard protocol. No human presence near the release point. No voices. No movement that might anchor the moment to a person's face. Cinder came out first. He moved low and fast into the tree line without pausing, without turning, as though the enclosure was simply the next extension of a world he had been navigating his entire life. 20 seconds and he was gone, absorbed into the shadows between the pines like water into soil. Ash took longer. The smaller wolf stood at the mouth of the crate for almost a full minute, nose working, reading the air in slow, methodical sweeps. Daniel watched through binoculars from the observation point. He could see the texture of Ash's coat now, the gray deepening toward charcoal along the spine, the buff markings on the ears exactly as they'd been on the examination table 7 weeks ago, improbably unchanged. Ash turned and looked back toward the crates, not at Daniel, not at any person, just back, at the direction of something, or the memory of a direction, a bearing. Then Ash walked into the trees. Vera retired from field work 14 months later, not from injury, not from failure. Her assessments remained exceptional until the end. Daniel put in the paperwork himself, citing age and workload, which were both true, and neither the complete reason. She came to live at his house outside Montrose, where she slept near the back door and spent mornings on the porch watching the tree line with the unhurried patience of an animal that had learned to wait without expectation. She never had another litter. The camera footage came from a routine wildlife survey, 8 months after the transfer. A researcher named Cole Whitfield sent it to Sonia as a data point, nothing more. Grainy trail cam footage, timestamp in the corner, the kind of image that usually ended up in a folder no one opened twice. He'd flagged it because of the pack composition. 2 young wolves, traveling together, moving through a meadow corridor at dusk. One larger, one smaller. They were doing what wolves do. Moving through terrain, reading it, owning it in the quiet way that wild things own space. Not by staying, but by knowing exactly how to leave. Sonia forwarded it to Daniel with no message. He watched it 3 times. The smaller wolf paused at the meadow's edge, exactly the way Ash had paused at the mouth of the crate. That same quality of attention. Thorough, unhurried. Then Cinder emerged from the tree line and moved past without stopping, and Ash turned and followed, and the meadow was empty again. 11 seconds of footage. Daniel closed his laptop and sat for a while in the quiet of his kitchen. Vera was on the porch. He could hear her shift her weight, the soft percussion of her tail against the wood planks. He didn't go out to her. He just sat with the sound of it, the ordinariness of it, the specific weight of a life that had touched another life and released it cleanly, without demand, without the need to be remembered for having done so. Outside, the tree line held its shape against the last of the evening light. Somewhere beyond it, 2 wolves were moving through the dark. A dog who had lost everything gave 2 lives enough time to become what they were always meant to be, and asked for nothing in return. Is that love, or something older than the word?